I'll start by introducing Luisa to everybody. Hi, my name is Sandra Kayon Parsons. I know some of you. I'm the Education Advisor at the English Language Centre, University of Adelaide. And we're lucky enough to have Luisa today to present a workshop which looking at the challenges that teachers face and explore reasons for students' reticence and try and discover ways to create a safe and supportive environment. So she's going to explore ways to encourage students to take responsibility for speaking English in the classroom. And I know that we all find that sometimes can be quite difficult. So Louise has been at the English Language Centre with us for 6 years. And prior to that, she had 25 years experience in the pharmaceutical and biotechnology industry in various roles, including training and sales. So she's got a Bachelor of Science, a Bachelor of Education with Adult Education and Training and a Cert 4 in TESOL. So thank you so much, Louisa, for taking us through this presentation today. I'm really looking forward to it.
Thank you, Sandra. I've actually been with the ELC for 7 years, so I'm sorry that bio was from when I presented this workshop 1 year ago now at the UECA conference at the PD Fest in Melbourne. So there's another year we can add on to that. Thank you everyone for joining me, and I guess, putting our heads together and listening to and talking about, why are students so reluctant to speak English in the classroom? And I guess we've all got our own feelings and experiences related to that. And I think, for me, it sort of came from a lot of frustration and maybe a lack of understanding about why students weren't speaking English, particularly after we've been together as a class with the same students for a few weeks and they're still not breaking out of that, fear or whatever, the reasons might be. And they just still don't want to speak English, or, you come back from a break and they're speaking their first language. And it just becomes really frustrating because, as we all know, it's so important for students to speak as much as they can to improve all of their language skills. So it's a big challenge. It's a challenge for them. It's a challenge for us. And I'm sure, if any of you have actually been in a classroom learning another language, it's a challenge that we can really relate to. And I know that I can when I when I speak other languages. So I'm going to try to make this presentation as interactive as possible. And I'm actually quite happy that there's a smaller group because that makes it easier. It would have been quite challenging if there were 25 people to make it interactive. So we might, hopefully have a chance to share some of your ideas and also some questions. So we can either use the chat at the bottom of your screen to type a message, to make a comment or to ask a question. And from time to time, I'll ask Sandra to share those with us. But I think we can actually, with a small group, we can hear each other speak from time to time as well. So let's see how we go. So I'm going to share my screen with you, and I will stop that from time to time as well, just so you're not always looking at a PowerPoint presentation. So can everyone see the PowerPoint presentation, the PowerPoint, Challenges and Strategies for Creating an English-Speaking Classroom? Thanks.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so I have updated this, and as I said, this is a presentation that I gave last year at the PD Fest in Melbourne. So I have updated it somewhat, but it is predominantly looking at the face-to-face classroom. And I guess, hopefully if we have a chance, we can share our experiences in the virtual classroom, which is something that I have been doing since February. So I haven't had any face-to-face students for quite a long time. Okay, so just make sure that I can actually change. Here we go. Oh, for a moment, I thought that my slides weren't going to change, even though I checked it earlier. So let me start with this quotation from Baron Lucart's speech. Is not only a product of acquisition, but also a necessary precondition to it. And I guess that just really shows the importance of speech for in language learning. So in this presentation, there are two parts. So in the first part, I'm going to give a bit of background. So the reasons for students being reticent to speak English in the classroom, look at some of the research, and also look at some of the things that we can do to encourage students to speak English or provide the environment in which they feel more comfortable and more confident to do that. And then in the second part, I will talk a little bit about the experience at the English Language Centre at the University of Adelaide and a survey that I conducted with students to explore this topic. And then summary and references. Okay, so firstly, if we look at some of the reasons, the main reasons that I found when I started looking into this topic, and I'll just go through some of these. Reluctant to engage in English and want to avoid interaction. Some students suffer from performance anxiety. Some of them fear losing face, and I think a lot of that is related to fear of making mistakes and losing face as a result. A proficiency or perhaps a lack of proficiency in the target language. Previous experience. So some students may have had bad experiences in the past and they tend to just prefer not to speak rather than risk having bad experiences again. Cultural beliefs, some students believe is appropriate classroom behaviour may stop them from speaking out. Sometimes it's just habit or a lack of confidence or personality. Some students are just very shy and quiet in their first language, and that will of course translate into language learning as well. So let's have a look at the research and what's driving this behaviour. So Louis and Jackson and Sui and others have they've said that students are very motivated to participate in classroom discussions, but they remain passive and reticent. They often perceive themselves to be active just by listening to others. The more proficient students are the most positive and the most active, and I guess there's no surprises there. I think we've all seen that in our students. And with all proficiency levels, it was found that students are most active in pair work, but the least active when responding to teacher questions, and I've certainly found that in my experience. And all students became more active in class with increasing exposure and familiarity with the learning environment. So what can we do to create a safe, relaxing and supportive learning environment? So the research is telling us that they're the sort of things that we need to do to encourage students to speak. So if we reduce anxiety, it makes the students more relaxed, which makes them more willing to participate. So again, no real surprises there. So actually I was going to, let me just go back a moment. So in supporting students, I'm really keen to hear your thoughts. So here's your chance to either, have your say or put a message in chat and tell us, what do you think we can do to support students to create a safe, relaxing and supportive learning environment? So some of the things that typically come up are, well, give them time, ask a question, tell them that we're going to give them time to think of an answer and then ask them to share their answer. So perhaps Sandra, would you like to share some of the comments? You're on mute.
Yes, some of the comments are stay kind in our corrections when we're correcting students, and how we do that. Pre-teach vocabulary was done so that you're drawing on some knowledge that they've already got, some pre-existing knowledge, or learning new knowledge in the vocab. I was going to actually, my input, I was going to say, if you've got a lower group level, is practice, even if it's a conversation where they can actually rehearse. It's obviously it's not going to be spontaneous, but at least they've had some time, that can build, break down some of the barriers.
Yeah, some great tips there. I think one that I find particularly challenging is correcting students when they are speaking, and I'm always quite reluctant to do that. So I wonder if the person who said being kind when correcting students, if you could share how you do that.
And that's Ariane.
Yeah. Hi, sorry.
Thank you.
How do I stay kind? I guess for me, it's more just being open and friendly and smiley rather than really strict teacher telling you've done the wrong thing, but sort of say thank you for trying, that's not exactly the right answer, but so just encourage them to not so they don't feel too shy with their but I don't mean interrupt them when they're actually speaking. I tend not to do that, but I would do it afterwards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great approach. The thing that I worry about the most is other students' reactions, because occasionally you'll have other students laugh at them, and if they're corrected, it makes it worse. So I do tend to be reluctant myself to correct students, but that's a lovely approach. Thank you, Ariane.
And Louisa, there's been a couple of others. Ruth said start with pair work and then move on to group work. So scaffolding it, I suppose. And Renuka mentioned rephrase their answer. So come back at them with the correct form or structure rather than say you got it wrong.
That's great. And that pair work, working in smaller groups, the research has shown that students are more confident when in small groups and less so when, in the classroom situation. And that's certainly something I find quite often. So giving them an opportunity to practice, to rehearse the types of answers or the language that they'll use to answer a question can help them to build that confidence and then eventually share with the class. Thank you for that feedback. That's excellent. That's great. So, oops, my controls are, I'm using two screens at the moment, so I just have to click on the other screen every now and then. So I want to move on to talk about the experience, or my experience and my colleagues' experiences at the University of Adelaide English Language Centre. So here we have the pre-enrollment English program for students. It's a pathway program for them to move on to prior to going to do their course at the university. So the PEP course, as I said, it's a pathway course, and we typically have 16 students per class. And some of the things that we do in our course, we have an English speaking policy, and it's enforced. All teachers seem to get on board and try to encourage that. Sorry, I'll just have to share my screen with you again. Thank you, Sandra, for the reminder. Okay, so yes, we have the English speaking policy. We have course progress consultations where students will get a grade for general speaking and independent learning. So it's things like a commitment to speaking English and following the policies of the English Language Centre. And one of the other things we do is we have class norms where we have a conversation with our students in the first week of their course, and we talk about the sorts of rules or norms that we think we should adopt as a class. And we always have speaking English on there so that students have that buy-in, they take that responsibility from the beginning. So they're just some of the things that we do with our approach here at the English Language Centre. Sorry, here we go. So what I was so curious to find out, what is really holding our students back from communicating in the classroom, from speaking English in the classroom. So I wanted to look at the student perspective. I decided I was going to devise a survey and ask the students some questions to try and find out a little bit more about their experiences, how they felt, what motivates them to speak English. This is actually one of my classes from last year, so it's quite fun seeing their faces again. So I started off by having a discussion with my class. to explore the challenges that they were facing and the strategies that they used to speak English. And we talked about punishment and reward, and because the students volunteered that information, they thought that having punishment or reward were going to be the most effective strategies to motivate them to speak English. And interestingly, 16 out of the 17 students preferred reward over punishment. However, 14 of the 17 thought that punishment was highly effective. So that was a bit tricky because my approach, being an adult, all adults, is more reward, less punishment. Follow the rules, absolutely, but I think we had different views on punishment, culturally different views about punishment. So that was interesting. So after I had this discussion and collected some information from my students, I then asked how students felt when they were speaking English in class in the first week of their course. And these were the results. So there aren't too many, well, there's probably only one surprise here. They felt embarrassed, shy, nervous. Few of them felt confident. Not too many felt self-conscious in their first week, which was interesting. There were one or two who went into a total panic. Some were anxious. And then I asked them how they felt after an average of 7 weeks. So after 7 weeks, no surprises here with being less embarrassed, less shy, less nervous, more confident, and less anxious. But the interesting one I found was that they felt more self-conscious than they did during the first week. So that was quite interesting. So actually, I think I've missed a slide. Sorry, I'm just going to go back. No, I've lost a slide. So this survey here that I've just shown to you was of 146 students from 16 classes who responded to a survey. And it was a survey done on SurveyMonkey, which was an interesting thing to learn how to use, but I got there in the end. I think it's one of those things when you start, you have that thought of, why am I doing this? But I did manage to navigate it. And the interesting thing, as I said before, was that students felt more self-conscious after an average of 7 weeks in the classroom. And that's, 4 hours of class a day, every week, plus group work outside of class. So it's surprising. I thought it was surprising that they felt more self-conscious after 7 weeks. So I also, in the survey, asked for students to make comments, to tell us how they felt. And here are some of the comments. In week 1, normal, cannot express clearly, afraid, error of making errors, a little bit hard, hoping to express myself but fear making mistakes, excited. And in week 7, felt more confident than before. It seems like I have more time to think when speaking English, just a little nervous, okay. A little better, much better, relaxed, better than before, but still a little nervous, afraid of making mistakes. Okay, so in the survey, they were also asked what they were mostly concerned about. What were their main reasons for being reluctant to speak English? And overall, most students were concerned about grammar, vocabulary, and pronunciation, and they felt more concerned about that than being worried about what their classmates or their teachers thought of them. So that self-consciousness that they were so worried about, or that I thought and many others thought they were so worried about, was more, I think, looking at their own abilities rather than what other people thought of them. So after that, we looked at motivators. So before we look at the motivators that the students said, the main things that motivated them to speak English, I'm just going to stop sharing and ask, what do you think are the main things that motivate students to speak English in class?
Lack of choice, I think. For a lot
Lack of
choice. I think they feel they have to, and that's what they do.
So if we don't give them a choice, they have to speak English. That motivates them.
I think so for some of them. Yeah.
Also, Louisa, someone has put in the desire for practice. Ruth mentioned the desire for practice. That's a motivator. And Philippa said interest in and knowledge of the topic. So if they're not, if it's an interesting topic and it's relevant and they've got knowledge, then that's a motivator.
And I guess the vocabulary associated with the topic as well.
Understanding the topic well, says Ariane, which is a little bit like what Philippa's saying. Yeah, so if you know you've got something you can share, you're more motivated.
Great, thank you. Any others?
Embarrassment about silence. I wonder that's more about us.
Yes, I think it's certainly culturally we like to fill those silence gaps, don't we? Okay, so let's have a look at what the students said in the survey. So the students had these 4 options, and they could rank from what motivated them the most to what motivated them the least. So number 1 was what they were motivated by the most. And the 4 options were commitment to the English Language Centre policy, receiving a pass grade, getting a fail grade, or just wanting to improve their English. So perhaps if you could just put on chat which one of those you think was the biggest motivator, the number 1 motivator for students. Before I share the answers.
Got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Receiving a pass seems to be the majority of what people are putting in, but then someone else has said wanting to improve. So someone's gone with the intrinsic motivation. But generally it's the majority is receiving a pass.
Okay, great, thank you. So let's have a look at what this cohort said. So we'll just look at number 1 here. So this is the number of students who expressed that their number 1 motivator. In the yellow you can see was improving English, so that intrinsic motivation, followed by commitment to the policy, so following the rules. Next was getting a pass, and the number 1 motivator for I think it was about 13% of students was getting a fail. So, and then you can see the number 2 motivator and so on. So they were asked to rank from 1 to 5. So improving the English is probably the most what motivates students the most to speak English in class. So let's move on to the comments. So I also asked them to make comments to explain what they meant or what motivates them. And you can see a lot of improving English or speaking skills, communication skills, getting a good job, communicating with locals. I want to communicate easily, so I always speak English in class. Being motivated to pass, getting a P in the final exam, and to communicate. So this is what the students said motivates them the most. So next I wanted to look at the challenges and strategies. So it's, having a look at the reasons for the behaviour, the reasons for students being reluctant to speak and how they felt. Moving on to, what are the challenges that we as teachers face and what are some of the strategies, which we spoke a little bit about before, but, let's have a closer look at that. So what are the main challenges that you face? So it'd be great to hear from some of you, and I think being such a small group, we can perhaps do that. Is that okay, Sandra? Yeah. What are the main challenges that you face in the classroom?
And now we're talking about a virtual classroom too. So yeah.
Yeah, and those I've certainly found those challenges are a little bit different, but I think that reticence is still there. So I see. Sorry, Sandra.
No, I was just going to say, if anyone, just unmute yourself in case you're speaking without being unmuted.
I think with the online learning, it's very hard to monitor their language when they're in breakout rooms, which is what I will tend to do. If you're in a classroom, you're walking around and you can monitor that they're not speaking their own language, but because all of mine, apart from one, is Chinese, as soon as I go into the breakout rooms, they sort of switch to English. But yeah, what can you do? You can't be in all the breakout rooms at the same time. So yeah, that's a challenge.
Yes, that's true. That is very challenging. You can hear everybody in the classroom, and even if you can't hear what they're saying, you can pick up the tone and everything else.
Yeah, the confidence level in their speech. Yeah.
I certainly had to adopt some new strategies for dealing with the challenge in the virtual classroom. That's been a learning curve. For me, one of the challenges is when you have a student who's shy and quiet as part of their personality, how to encourage that student to participate more actively in both group and class discussions.
That's a good one, Louisa, because I think even with domestic students, who might be a little bit introverted anyway, and can get away through a whole university degree without saying a lot, but the only way to improve spoken English is for our students is to use it. So really it's a double whammy, I think, for those types of students.
Well, it is. And of course there's that part of it where it's beneficial for the students, but we as teachers are also having to assess their speaking in seminars, general speaking and so forth. And if we don't hear them, if they're not speaking, if they're not asking and answering questions and sharing their ideas, it then makes it really challenging to assess students in those areas.
Perhaps pairing them initially with students that you can see they get on with, and then sort of saying to everyone, pairing you like this too. So I expect to hear you speak, and some of them, so that sort of friendship group relaxes them a little, because that's quite daunting in the first couple of weeks.
Yes, because we saw that, having a relaxed atmosphere helps to build that confidence and helps students to feel more comfortable.
Yeah, so therefore sort of maybe manually pairing them in our breakout rooms.
And I think the objectives too, I think that's a good point, Shamini, and I was going to say, if it's just the general English speaking, it's about fluency. It's not about accuracy and formality and academic. I mean, you can assess, obviously, if they've got to do an oral presentation, you're assessing, the criteria is different, but what you're going back to, Louisa, is setting up a situation where they feel comfortable. So it's about, you can make mistakes. It doesn't matter, it's about developing your fluency. So really emphasising that you're not there to pick up every error.
Absolutely, yes.
You could.
That it's a safe. Sorry, John.
When going into breakout rooms, you could, as teachers, make some notes, have some kind of form that you could use for this purpose on selected, comments that different students made in the breakout rooms, and then give some feedback, but emphasize the positives of it. Well, so there could be a student who's very, very quiet, very reluctant to speak, but if that person says 2 or 3 useful contributions in a whole class feedback afterwards, say, Billy said so-and-so, and that was really helpful in keeping the discussion moving and helping other people to interact.
That's a really positive and encouraging way to motivate students to speak. It might become a little bit competitive too. You know, is the teacher going to point out my good comment?
Another problem is that some students just culturally aren't accustomed to giving their views, especially on a controversial issue. I mean, when you get to higher levels and it's a sort of academic topic, they may not even have that kind of experience to be able to talk on the topic, even though you think it's relatively straightforward.
Yes, there are certainly some of our students that in their culture, they're not exposed, or in their countries are just not exposed to some of the topics that we hear about on a daily basis. So the other question I have here, and we've sort of touched on that a little bit, is what are your most effective strategies? So we've kind of moved into that, and there have been some really great strategies that you've shared with us. Are there any others? Would anybody else like to share some of their strategies?
One thing that we tried in our program is, for them to put all their ideas down first, and we allowed them to speak in their first language, put as many ideas down, and then after that, explain or, provide your answers in English. So that kind of helped them because they were confident, they had the content. So when they were speaking English, they didn't have to worry about the content anymore. They just focused on grammar.
Lovely. Yeah, that would be really helpful. And I guess it's, also having that time to get their thoughts together before they respond. I think one of the challenges that I find quite frustrating is the peer pressure, particularly when, if we have 15 Chinese students and one non-Chinese, for example, or even sometimes 16 Chinese students, that they feel awkward speaking in English when they're in breakout rooms, and how to get them out of that, that awkward feeling about speaking English with each other. Does anyone have any suggestions, any tips there?
I think if you give them, and this applies to everything, but if you give them something to do for homework, for example, listen to this TED lecture, or here's the topic we're going to be thinking about tomorrow, and give them the opportunity to think about their ideas in advance. So not to memorize things, but to give them some preparation time so that when they come to class the next day, they've actually got some ideas already that they can prepare, so they don't feel so put on the spot.
Yeah, giving them that time to think about and prepare. Actually, that reminded me about another challenge that I'm probably at a bit of a loss with the virtual classroom, and that's when they are giving their oral presentations, which we touched on earlier. And I'm finding that most students are reading their presentations, and they know that we know that they're reading and it's going to affect their grade, but they still read. And I'm just at a loss as to really what to do to encourage them to speak to their slides rather than read a presentation. Are you finding the same?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. I suppose that depends on the assessment criteria as well. Like, so if you have some flexibility with that, and it is more about the communicability of that presentation. Obviously, it's got to be still, they can't be riddled with errors, but you can have a few different errors and it doesn't matter. So it's more about, yes, the use of formal language in an academic situation, but some flexibility with, making a few mistakes.
Yes.
What about, how about the students preparing palm cards that they show to you before they present their seminar or oral presentation, so that because they've got to the stage where they've condensed their ideas onto a few cards, they may actually be more confident about speaking using those cards than using a whole typed out page of notes, which they just read.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I think it's often really difficult to tell whether they're going to be whether they use those cards or whether they're just reading, because what we see is the shared screen with the speaker in a tiny little corner. So it makes it really difficult to know what they're looking at.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the oral presentations have certainly changed a lot with the virtual classroom. Well, that's great. Thank you for sharing those ideas with you. Well, I'm about to summarise, but if anyone has any more challenges or strategies that they'd like to share with us, we'd love to hear.
I liked the idea with Nuka bringing up is, and this also depends on, you can use it across levels, of the use of L1.
Yeah, so we don't punish them for speaking. You know what I mean? It's like there is a time and place for first language classroom. So,
well, I mean, that is where research is going back to anyways, particularly with lower level learners, that of using that first language and being able to
and working with the Japanese students as well, because they are so silent, you know, so, and unless they have a correct and their sentence structure is perfect, you know, but they need time to work on it. So yeah,
they do. Yes. I find that they just need a lot of time. I have worked with Japanese students before, and they just sit silently for such a long time, which makes it really difficult.
Even in our informal chat activities that we have to combine the old chat program with the PEP students, it's the PEP students are the ones that are actually, the Chinese students really are the ones that are talking a lot more than the Japanese students. So that's the very clear difference that I noticed. But if you address them individually, then they're brave enough to share. They actually, you know, have some very good ideas as well.
Right, just not in a group. Lovely. Well, thank you for sharing all of those with me, with us. There are some great tips and suggestions there. I am going to share the last couple of screens with you. So I am in summary. Oops, going backwards. Sorry, technology. Here we go. So there are challenges, not just for the students, but for the teachers as well. Student and teacher perceptions may be different. Policy is important. And some strategies are more effective than others, but creating a safe and supportive environment is essential. So these are the references. And that's the end of my presentation. I'd like to thank you very much for joining me. It's been really interesting revisiting this after 12 months and making the changes and thinking about how the classroom has changed with having to teach in a virtual classroom for such a long time now. And I guess that's presented all of us with different challenges and also different strategies. And so I'd like to invite questions. Are there any questions?
Yes. When you administered the survey of the students, and you talked about what motivated them, you know, more punishment or reward, what did they actually understand by the meaning of punishment?
Oh, well, they come up with some really fascinating punishment suggestions for punishment, and there were things from money, being fined, you know, $50 or $100, which I thought was really weird. What else was there? There were fines, there was extra homework, failing. So they were quite harsh. You know, their punishments were pretty severe. So quite different from what we would think would be acceptable punishment. Yeah. I think for us, it might be, you know, sort of going back 50 years, 40 or 50 years in terms of acceptable things, what we think is acceptable as a punishment.
I think a lot of people use money, and a lot of, not people, but students talk about that, because even families use that, you know, I'll give you $5 if you do this, or if you do that, if you swear, if you don't say that, we've had those swear jars or whatever things. So, and then I know that they've used the money at the end to buy, you know, treats for the class, you know, for the collective amount of money.
I know that some teachers make their students sing a song in English if they're caught speaking L1.
That's a good one.
I don't know if that works. I haven't tried that myself. Buying chocolate for the class is another one. But I think that would encourage me, I think. I don't know if that's punishment for me.
Sorry, this is not a question, but I sort of remembered something I used to do with the students face-to-face, and I will be doing with our online presentations shortly, is to encourage them to talk when they're in their pairs. What I tend to do when they're practicing, I've always insisted that they have to write down and give 2 positive feedback comments when they're doing their pair presentation practices. And I think that sort of encourages.
And Shamini, do they give that feedback
to them? And then I sort of to the pair. So they have to give it to their partner. And so when it's coming from them, I think, and because you sort of enforce that they have to find at least 2 positive things, and I sort of say 1 to work on. So start with the positive. I find that that's sort of, yes, and they gain confidence if that's their presentation partner, because you get them to work, you know, consistently with each other for a few weeks. And when they hear that positive comments first, that sort of, I think, you know, and every time they do a presentation or a practice or speak together, then the idea is they keep finding more positives, and hopefully it builds up in their mind.
Oh, so lovely. That creates a really good positive environment for them as well.
And it's not just coming from me, it's making both of them think, so they do it to each other. And I find that works.
Yeah, one thing I was having quite a bit of success with in the face-to-face PEP that I started doing last year was giving them a topic that they would discuss, and in groups they would actually write a screenplay or they'd write a script for a play, and then they'd get to act it out. And you saw the quietest students who you never heard from become this whole other personality. I haven't tried that in the virtual classroom as yet.
So through drama.
Through drama.
Yeah.
Through drama and role play. Are there any other questions?
Some people love and some people hate.
Yes.
Like role plays, isn't it? Some love them, some hate them.
Yes, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's about it. If anyone does have any more questions, then I'm sure they can email them through. But thank you, Luisa, for sharing your insights and your research and your what you found out with the class that you've been working on. I think it's a question that all of us in this field have and would like answers and solutions to. Ideas of how we can get students speaking more and using English more in the classroom. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for joining me and for sharing your ideas. It's been really helpful. Much appreciated. Thank you, Sandra.
And what I'll do is I'll send on the attendance to Sophie O'Keefe at English Australia. So you'll get a certificate of attendance, and if you're collecting your CLPD points, it can go towards that as well.
Lovely. Thank you.
Thanks, Luisa.
There will be another, I think English Australia and Grants planning another get together before the end of the year on it's going to be on developing a wellbeing team, perhaps in your centre, of what you can do to no extra resources, how you can get something going for your students, because the focus during this time of studying online and remote learning of how you can support your students' wellbeing. So that's a topic that's either going to be late in November or very early December. So I might see you there.
I'm getting very distracted by your cat, Ruth.
Yes.
I think it's obviously feeding time. Mine does that around feeding time. Sorry, Sandra, I didn't hear that last bit, but
No, that's
He
fine.
clearly is trying to make his point that it's time
is.
for dinner. Sorry about that.
I know my cat does the same.
Okay, so thanks very much, everybody. Maybe see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Bye-bye.
much.
Well done, Louisa.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks again. Bye.